You're watching Faultlines. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. This is a special episode where the focus is on the US-Iran war, the Israel-Iran war that has entered day 7. The big stories that we will focus on in this edition of Faultlines, whether there is now going to be implosion or explosion when it comes to Iran. There is a leadership vacuum, but at the same time, the regime is clear that they will continue to retaliate. The second story on this edition of Faultlines, Zelensky's Trump card. Well, it is now clear that it is now a cheap drone warfare where Zelensky and the Ukrainian military have a huge edge over NATO allies, over all NATO countries. Will Donald Trump be able to use that leverage? That's our next story. And last we get you, well, after Iran, what next? Regime change is the target for Iran, but it seems Donald Trump may not stop there. Cuba could be next after Iran, and Donald Trump has said that in so many words. But first up, let's get you the latest that's unfolding in this conflict. Well, a week is almost a lifetime when you talk about a war. More so, a war that is not just about two countries. This is now a war that has spread to the entire Middle East and still continues to escalate, widening minute by minute. The latest update that is coming in is that IDF has claimed that 50 jets bombed Khamenei's underground bunker. And that's still being done to ensure that there is no remnants whatsoever of any Iranian official staying there. IDF has released this video a week after the first attack that actually wiped out Khamenei and the top leadership of Iran. It's not just that. As far as Iran's next moves are also concerned, it's very clear it will continue to retaliate. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has said that some countries have begun mediation efforts and said that mediation talks should be aimed at US and Israel. What does this mean? Is it going to be Oman, Qatar, or any other country? The terms at which any potential peace talks could take place. More importantly, where does this leave the entire regime change aspiration, which was the primary goal of US-Israel when they started this operation? Operation Epic Fury for Donald Trump and his forces, Operation Roaring Lion for Benjamin Netanyahu. Where do things stand right now is the key question. And my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul brings us up to speed with the latest that's unfolding in a region that remains on the edge as we speak. Listen in.
There's a scale-up in the attacks all across Tehran and other regions across Iran where the ballistic missile launch pads are there. There was, in fact, instruction given to the Israeli military and, of course, the American military as well, that all these launch pads where missiles are being thrown into Israel and also launched towards other countries in the region needs to be completely wiped out. So the capability of the Iranian IRGC and the military to launch these missiles against other countries has to be stopped, and that's the top priority for Israel and America. And these visuals clearly indicate the scale of the operation that is underway. But the reality of the matter is that Iran has thousands of such launch pads all across. They also have a camouflage facility for most of them. Some of them are also hiding in mountainous territory. So it would be difficult to wipe off all of them at this particular stage. It might be time consuming as well. But that's the mission that the Americans and the Israelis are taking off, because before the Americans and Israelis have their own resources depleting, especially the air defense missiles and mechanisms that they have, they want to wipe off Iran's capability to launch these missiles. So many of these missiles are also onboard truck and can be moved from one place to another without any hesitation. So as of now, Israel and America, scaling up their operation all across, Iran, even as there has been a fresh threat issued by the Iranian foreign minister and, of course, the deputy foreign minister saying that they are ready for a ground invasion and they're not scared of it. They will not come to the talking table and there's no question of a ceasefire. America and Israel only increasing their military wrath in Iran.
Well, Zelensky has been seeking time from Donald Trump for some time now. He hasn't been able to get so. But suddenly the Ukrainian president finds himself to be much more useful in Oval Office than what he has been in almost a year. In fact, Ukrainian President Zelensky has claimed that US has sought Ukraine's support in the war against Iran, specifically in countering Iran's Shahid drones. Zelensky said that Ukraine would provide assistance to the US. In response, of course, there is leverage. There is something that Zelensky would like to extract out of it, and that is Patriot missiles. During its war with Russia, Ukraine has developed highly effective means of downing the Iranian-designed Shahid kamikaze drones, which Moscow has been using for much of the 4-year war. So Ukraine has been able to master it, reverse engineer it, and is now in a position to tell the Americans and several others to how to ensure that they are able to beat Iranian drones there. What lies ahead? The possibility of this leading to some sort of a major breakthrough, also the larger ramification for entire Europe here, are some of the other aspects that we are going to now put forth to in terms of also the costing here. It's a $1,000 drone, or at least a couple of $1,000s, and you have $4 million Patriot missiles that are actually downing them. In fact, let's put out some of those points here.
Але у нас дефіцит ПАК-3. Так. Наприклад, якщо ми говоримо про зброю під час війни, з якою у нас дефіцит, то ПАК-3 ракети, якщо вони нам їх дадуть, ми дамо їм перехоплювачі. Це рівноцінний обмін. Але ми говоримо про універсальні перехоплювачі, які працюють в будь-яку погоду. Така була зима. Хто ж знав, що відсоток тоді перехоплень буде менший через погоду. Ми працюємо над новими технологіями для перехоплювачів, щоб вони працювали в будь-яку погоду.
All right, that was Ukrainian President Zelensky talking about how he can now be useful. But what really does this trump card entail? Let's put that out, viewers. Kiev has offered expertise against Iranian Shahid drones. The proposal is very clear: drones for Patriot missiles. Ukrainian president understands that this is his moment where he can extract some sort of leverage, and that leverage is the Patriot missiles that US has said that it will not grant because it wants or is hoping for some sort of a peace breakthrough. In the midst of that, it almost looks like that Kiev holds leverage over the drone technology. These are low-cost interceptors. That's a massive alternative to expensive Patriots. As I said, a $4 million missile that actually takes down those $30,000, $20,000 drones. That's the kind of asymmetry that has now come in as far as warfare is concerned. And Zelensky is now clear that he is willing to help only and only if there is some sort of a positive for him, for his situation as well. So that's how the situation is actually expanding, and that's how the warfare is actually changing. Now, in the shadow of the Iranian war, there are now many questions that are coming up as to whether or not the US allies are set to participate. Will this now be a NATO versus Iran war? Will there be other countries that will participate as well? Canada's defense chief pointed out and said that allies are in talks about possibly helping Persian Gulf states defend themselves against bombings from Iran. In fact, earlier Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said that he couldn't rule out his country's military participation in the escalating war in the Middle East. Carney is clear and Canada is clear. They are NATO allies. In fact, while it was very clear what some of the commentary that came in from NATO allies, where they said this is unconsulted offensive action. But at the same time, they understand that this is something that is testing the NATO alliance. Carney's visit to Australia this week was overshadowed by the expanding war in the Middle East, sparked by a massive US-Israeli strike on Iran that killed its supreme leader, Khamenei. Speaking alongside local counterpart Anthony Albanese in Canberra, Mark Carney was asked whether there was a situation in which Canada would get involved. And he said, one can never categorically rule out participation, while stressing that it was hypothetical. Well, 7 days later, viewers, it looks like it's almost not hypothetical. And let's put that out to Staff Cohen, who is in fact a current IDF Special Forces soldier, joins us on the broadcast. Thanks much for speaking to us on NDTV. The question I want to ask you is that 7 days later, there are some very important voices that are coming in from NATO allies. But no one, of course, has completely backed the US. but no one has said that they won't back either. 7 days later, what are the possibilities of now NATO allies joining in the US and Israel?
Well, ma'am, thank you, first of all, for having me. It is a pleasure and an honor being back here. Of course, that NATO allies will be silenced about, stepping into the mud. It's always easiest and it's always more comfortable when someone else is washing your dirty laundry for you. Right now, NATO allies and every democracy, every country within this world that see themselves as a supporter of democracy, of freedom, of human rights, everyone knows that the terror regime of Iran poses immediate danger and threat to everyone. And it's not my personal opinion alone, ma'am. It's their own former leaders' words who said, Ahmadinejad, who ruled Iran from 2005 to 2013, he said, we will convert the entire world into Islam. And it's not enough to be Muslim, ma'am. You need to be the right kind of Muslim, because may I remind you that ISIS chopped down the heads of Muslims in Syria if those Muslims did not know how many rakah.
Mr. Cohen, I think some of that has been established in terms of the reasons, but I'm still asking you the question I did ask earlier, which is that do you expect US to be backed completely by UK, France, Greece, Canada, and other countries? Do not forget the commentary that came in from Spain.
Absolutely. I expect them to do so because this is within their immediate interest, because they're also under immediate existential threat due to the Iranian ballistic missiles and due to their plan, which is a khilafah, convert the entire world or make in one Islamic global state. I personally think that France, their leader, they have a weak leader. They have weak leadership. They do not understand the language here in the Middle East, which it's all about tribe, society. It's all about tribe, power, and land. This is what it's about, And in France, they're trying, or the Western world, or some of the NATO countries, they're trying to pursue negotiation with someone that is already on his way to murder them. I would expect them.
But Mr. Cohen, then let me ask you this question. The Iranian president, Pezeshkian, put out a statement saying that negotiations have begun. Earlier it was Oman and Qatar, but both of them have been battered by the missiles and drones that have been attacked by Iran. Will some of these European countries actually now create that breakthrough opening for negotiations?
I sincerely hope so, ma'am. I sincerely hope so. But when the terror regime of Iran is saying that they're willing to negotiate, you have to keep in mind, it's not just a lie. It's a deep 7th century mentality of propaganda and twisting everything just to steal some time. They have no intention to negotiate, ma'am. They have intention for a khilafah to put that are refusing to put Iranian women that are refusing to put hijab, face and hair cover. They're throwing them into prison while we send our women.
Okay, I think some of that has been documented, Mr. Cohen, and some of that is the reason why you have a lot of people in Iran also celebrating what has happened, but that still doesn't answer the fundamental question, which way this war is headed.
My grandmother fled Tehran. The only reason that we're here, not in Tehran, is because my grandmother ran away from there. Of course, the Iranian people want and deserve freedom.
All right, I'm going to leave it there, Mr. Cohen. Thanks much for speaking to me on Faultlines.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Turning attention now to the other important aspect of this war, after an American submarine sank an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean in an attack that has killed at least 87 people. Sri Lanka took control of a second Iranian naval vessel off its coast. Tehran has warned that the US will bitterly regret the torpedo attack on an Iranian naval ship in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka has stressed its neutrality, saying it won't take sides as it finds itself caught in the middle of the US-Israeli military campaign against Iran. And that tells you the fast evolving nature of this conflict. On day 7, as things escalate, what is it that could actually lead to a potential breakthrough? And what about countries like Sri Lanka that are actually neutral bystanders who get impacted because their economic zone is suddenly part of the war theatre? Asanka Abegunasekara, who's a political analyst, will join us on the broadcast. But first up, listen in to this soundbite.
Because it was, the goal was not, their aim was not going to war. They went for an exercise, which was arranged by the Indian Navy. There are so many other guests who went there, and they, took part in a parade. And, everything was a peaceful, training course or peaceful training process. So they didn't need, weapons. They actually went to that mission long before the war started.
All right, Mr. Abhay Gunashekhara joins us on the broadcast. I think he's joining us from DC, where he's normally there. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to us. Let me start by asking you, it almost seems like Sri Lanka is caught in the crossfire, quite literally, but also tells that there is no scope even for countries to remain as neutral bystanders in a conflict whose theater is expanding as we speak.
Yes, absolutely correct. It's in the Indian Ocean now, as you know, the geography of Iran. So it's rightly facing the Indian Ocean. So the next theater, I would say, the significant theater, just like in the Second World War, we saw Pacific and the Atlantic. I see Indian Ocean as the most significant sort of this security theater. And we have felt it. India has felt it. Sri Lanka has felt it. We have rescued now. 2 operations have been carried out. So the Aris Bashir, which went to Trincomalee, and now 200 of them has been sort of transported. So we are following both the countries, India and Sri Lanka, the norms, values which we have committed to the international bodies. I think that's the way forward that we should be working together as India and Sri Lanka.
Which brings me to ask you, sir, that in a conflict like this, where suddenly it is not just about a particular region, you're talking about international waters. Where do you see smaller countries like Sri Lanka, and not just Sri Lanka, actually in this entire conflict? Because in international waters, it could be any nation.
Yes, I mean, the overspill can be to any nation. What has happened right now is unacceptable. I can agree with the former Indian Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal, who mentioned that the US have ignored India's sensitivity. Clearly, India can't, work on as the India's net security provider in the region in this capacity. India has signed Limoa, Kamkasa. Sri Lanka has signed AXA so far, defense agreements with the United States. But I think we should have been told before. It's also a violation of the UNCLOS, Law of the Sea, Article 58. The nation should be informed because it was in the Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone. So I think it's a relook at India, a fresh India as well as Sri Lanka relook at US.
Absolutely, many laws have been broken, and in fact, Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, was the first one to raise that concern. But since then, this conflict has passed all those important thresholds when it comes to how many international laws and rules have been broken. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks much, Mr. Abhay Gunashekhara, for speaking to us. Turning attention now to the other important story on Faultlines this week. Well, Donald Trump today and on Thursday hinted that his administration could shift its focus to Cuba once the ongoing US military operations against Iran conclude. He started with Venezuela. He then moved on to Iran, and he's already set his sights on what he wants to do next, which is, in his words, fix the situation in Cuba. Donald Trump said that we think that we want to fix it. Finish this one first. Referring to the conflict involving Iran, he added that it would be only a matter of time before Cuban Americans would return to the island. Addressing the largely Miami-based audience, many of whom have Cuban heritage, Donald Trump said that he hopes people will be able to travel back to Cuba, but hopefully not to stay. Now, why are these remarks significant? Well, they come in at a time when tensions continue to escalate in the Middle East, come in at a time where the administration is now looking at a long-term 4 to 6 week sort of a scenario for ending the conflict in Iran, and it is already looking ahead. It is looking at another next foreign policy milestone that it wants to now conquer. Now, how does this all impact? Let's put that out for our viewers. and tell you exactly and detail that for you as to what it really means when something like this actually happens. And why is it that Donald Trump really wants Cuba? Well, there is, of course, a regime change narrative. He's done so in Venezuela, where he says he's been very happy. He's attempting to do so in Iran. It hasn't been successful so far. There is a leadership vacuum, but it hasn't led to a regime change. And the broader messaging he wants to put forth is that he's willing, and his administration is willing, to confront communist regimes. That's the first key aspect of why he wants Cuba. Second is strategic location. Cuba sits in the backyard of the United States, just 150 kilometers from the US mainland, and Donald Trump would go down in history as the US president who managed to overthrow a communist Cuba regime about 50 odd years after that Cuban missile crisis. Countering rival powers, particularly in intel and security cooperation. That's the other aspect. Then there is the historic US-Cuba rivalry, ties of which has actually been strained for decades now, all of which Donald Trump hopes will, well, if nothing else, bring him a Nobel, who knows. Roll back Obama-era policies, that's what he's already done. And Barack Obama was the one who normalized ties with Cuba. But Donald Trump, as I said, is itching to go down in history books, and Cuba could be the other big thing that he wants to quote-unquote fix. All right, on that note, we wrap this edition of Faultlines. Thanks so much for watching. Up ahead is that big exclusive that is flashing at the bottom of your screens, India Matters with Shiv Arur, and you have the famous air chief on NDTV after this very short break.